call this the circles of influence. If you picture a tree that's been cut, and you see all of those circles and those rings that are there, the center of that tree is called the heartwood, and I call that our sacred space, and that is the space that we have just for ourselves, for an understanding of who we are, for being able to learn and bring in all of the understanding and to connect to deity or spirit, God, whomever that is for you. But having that sacred space where you can connect and that's peaceful. And I picture that as a spotless white room that's just for me and for God to connect and to be in that space. And nobody's ever allowed in that space because that's mine. That's my space to be at peace.
Welcome to the Light the Day podcast, where we explore spiritually transformative experiences. I'm your host, Julie Clough, and today I have on the show Alan Smith. Hi, Alan.
Hi, Julie.
I am so excited to have you here.
I'm excited to be here.
Oh, it's going to be so much fun. We've been friends for a couple of years, and we have enjoyed talking about our own spiritual journeys in life. And so I'm excited for you to share today some of the things I already know and some of the things I may not know. So this is going to be fun.
Sounds good.
Let's start out with you just sharing just a little bit about yourself and what you do.
Well, let's see. I'm Alan Smith. I am a lover of shoes, and I've spent 18 years in the real estate industry. Uh, Recently, over the past few years, I've been learning a lot about shamanic principles, and I use those in my life and in my coaching. I'm a professional speaker, so I love to get up on the stage and, share some really fun ideas and thought processes to make your brain kind of go, wah! And, just figure out ways to make life more fun and more interesting and more clear.
That's awesome. I love that. Yes, we're gonna help everybody's brain go, what was that noise again? Today. This is going to be fun. All right. So share a little bit of your journey. Kind of take us back to, I know you've had some pivotal things that have happened. So share a little bit about what it was like before and some of those pivotal things that happened and how that changed your experience and your perspectives.
So I grew up in a pretty religious family, kind of the regular things like that. You go to church all the time. I got married in my late 20s, and my wife and I had a little boy when we were 29, our first child, and he passed away when he was 3.5 months old.
Wow.
That was a pretty huge change in our trajectory and our thought process. We suddenly went from this place of being parents to all of a sudden we weren't parents anymore. And that was a huge, shift of and thought process around who am I? Where do I fit in? We have names for people when they lose a parent or both their parents, they become orphans. If they lose a spouse, they're widowed. But when you lose a child, they don't really have a term for that. And so I just had this space where, am I still a parent? Am I still a dad? That was a really hard place to be. We worked with some amazing people who stepped into our life that very day in support of us. And so we got involved in an organization. Our son died of SIDS. And so we got involved in the local SIDS organization, and we got to, just make some amazing friends who, after 28 years, are still just some of the most amazing friends in our life. And so we got to help locally run support groups and do things like that. We got to help on a national level. I was the steering committee chair for the national conference in
Wow.
2000. So this has been a while. And so, just changed my life and I stepped into this space of caring for people. I'd always been that caregiver, but it changed my thought process around that into something around helping more people, helping a bigger group of people. Um, Whereas before I kind of was, cared for that tight group, the people closest to me. And I realized, oh, there's a bigger space out there that I can help with. And so I just jumped into that and kept going. Um, a few years ago, oh,
And I just want to ask, when you lost your son, it's not only an identity shift, but how did that change your perspective on life and your connection to, the spirit world, the other side? And was there any change there, or was it more just like that identity piece? Because I remember when my kids died, it was so challenging, just even when people would say, how many kids do you have? And I struggled with that question, but I can't imagine being in a place where your only child dies and then you have to, then how do you answer that question? Do you have any children? And so that would be challenging too. And I think you've had children since then too, right?
we have. So we had two more kids after that. So when people ask me that question, I actually, you know, have to pause for a minute and decide how am I going to go there? How much am I going to tell them? How open am I going to be? So I often say I have three kids or I have two kids, an angel, and a couple of spares that we've picked up along the way because we've taken in, some of our family and a friend of my son's from high school came and stayed with us. And, so kind of had a revolving door at our house, and invited lots of people in. But that is such a hard question,
Yeah.
when people say, how many kids do you have?
Yeah.
And I say three
Mm-hmm.
normally, and they're like, oh, how old are they? Because that's where they always go next, right? Oh, how old are they? Well, one is in heaven.
Mm-hmm.
And then I have a daughter who's 26 and a son that's 24.
Mm-hmm.
Oh. And then they're kind of stuck on the one in heaven. And they are either very open about asking or they pause and they're not quite sure what else to say. And so it really depends on how you want to, address that with people. Um, did it change my spirituality or my thought process around the spirit world? I have always had this fascination, you know, in my teenage years, I think is when it started, maybe. Growing up, I had lots of death in my family. My grandparents and my great grandparents, were all quite old and lived to be ripe old ages. So I knew four of my great grandparents.
Mm-hmm.
And because my dad is one of the older kids and my mom is, I'm one of the oldest grandchildren on our side. So I got to know lots of people. But as I entered my teenage years, they all started to pass away and to do that transition thing that we talk about all the time. And so I think it started this curiosity around, okay, what comes next? Our religious upbringing gives us certain beliefs, in an afterlife, but it doesn't go much further than that. It's pretty surface level, right? So I started reading NDEs and being in that space and
So
trying
for
to,
those that don't know what an NDE
oh,
is, share what
sorry,
that is. Yeah.
near-death experiences. And so I read lots of those and looked for things that I could find, Betty J. Eady and some of those like that. Return from Tomorrow is the one that I'm thinking of that probably most people are aware of. It's just a small little book. In fact, it's sitting on my shelf over there.
It's sitting on my
Um,
shelf too. It's the first one I read many years ago when it came out. Yeah.
and it
Started me on that journey of just voraciously searching for every near-death experience story I could find, because I'm like, these are people, you know, you don't, if you're going to travel to Hawaii, you don't ask your neighbor who's never been there. You ask somebody who's been there, like, where did you go? What was it like? What did it look like? So the fascination with near-death experiences, these are people that have actually been on the other side and can come back and tell us about it. And so to me, there was um, no better witness of what was on the other side. So I love near-death experiences also.
Same. So I just was very fascinated with that, and I just kept thinking, okay, I want to learn more. I want to know more. Um, so I just every time I came across a book, I would grab it. And eventually in my life, I started coming across people, because as you age, you get to know more people, and you start to have, people in your life that have actually had these experiences. And some are really open about sharing them, and some are more private. And so as I've gotten to know people over the years, I've just had this, started to compile kind of my own belief structure around, how all those pieces fit together. Because what I find is they're so similar, and there's so much information there. Um, so given that fascination, I think it's really ironic that about 8 years ago, maybe nine, I don't know, all the days start to run together at this point. I was invited to be a part of a men's group, and we were having an activity at a friend's ranch. Um, and I went out on the front porch at the ranch, and Julie, you've been at the ranch.
I have.
Um, and there was this guy sitting at the table, on the front porch, and that's kind of a congregating area. We all kind of hang out at that space when we go down. Um, and his name is Vinny Tolman, and he shared his experience with me. Um, and it had such a profound impact on me. I mean, it touched my soul so deeply that I just was like, wow, I'm suddenly in a different space. I felt like a whole different person. And if you ask Vinny, he's will say that he saw me change. He saw the impact that that story was having on me. Um,
Yeah,
so
and
I
for those that who don't know Vinny, Vinny's going to be on the show probably a couple weeks after this episode. But he had a near-death experience, a pretty profound, very in-depth near-death experience. And so that's what you're referring to. And
correct.
yeah.
And so I proceeded to hound him for several years and help and poke. He calls me the cattle prod, uh, to get his story out there. My wife and I helped with transcribing his experience from an audio file, which then was passed on and used by he and another friend, Lynn Taylor, to write the book, The Light After Death, which is Vinny's near-death experience.
Right.
Um, and it's amazing, and it was very profound for me, and changed my focus.
So tell me a little bit about what do you feel like shifted in you in that moment? What were some of the, if you can identify anything, sometimes it's hard to put into words, those spiritually enlightening moments, but if there's anything that you can kind of grab onto to kind of share with us, that like, what were some of those shifts that you experienced at that moment?
I think, part of it was that, he had a guide that just met him and knew all about him. Um, and that understanding that somebody would be waiting for me when I die, and that would know me very well, and someone that would have met my son when he died, and that knew
Mm,
him. And Vinny's experience was one where, uh, there was progression. He'd be taught a principle, and then and until he learned it and understood it, and actually took that principle to heart and made it part of him, they would stay on that principle and continue the learning and work. And as soon as he got that, they'd move to another one, and he'd experience that. And they just did this with several principles. And in the book, there's 10 principles, but I think there's a lot more, that maybe, it continued, as I've talked to him a lot over the years. And so for me, that idea of the opportunity to progress, and that when I die, I'm not stuck in one place. I don't have to go to purgatory or to spirit prison or whatever, all those different terms are that we see in scripture and in religion, that, because they picture us going to a place because we weren't good enough, or that we weren't, paying attention, or we didn't do the right things, or we didn't repent enough, or whatever those things are. What I noticed is there was no judgment in that space of learning. It was, oh, okay, here's something that you need to understand and move forward. And that was so comforting to me, because I felt like, oh, I get to continue to learn. I get to continue to experience. And it brought me to a realization. We don't take anything physical with us, but we do get to take two things with us when we go. And that is the experience, the understanding, the learning that we've acquired while we're here, and the connections we make,
Right.
the people that we connect to and that we love, and that we have spent our whole lives building relationships with. We get to keep those. And so those two things were so incredibly comforting to me.
Well, and as a parent who has lost a child, there's this little bit of sense of am I, am I living a good enough life? Am I going to make it so that I can be reunited with my child? Am I going to end up in a different spot because they're pure and innocent and wonderful? And here I am living this long period on earth, making a lot of mistakes. And am I going to make it? Am I going to be reunited with my child? I wonder if that was some of your thought process, if it kind of relieved any of that doubt in your mind that you'd be reunited.
I think for me, I always felt like I would get to be with my son Bryce again.
That's
That was
awesome.
never a question for me. Um, but it was always, what was his experience? Where did he end up? Where, what happened with him as an infant? I believe that we're adult spirits all the time. We exist as mature beings, and that we come here for an experience. And so I never pictured him as a baby on the other side. I just
Yes.
pictured him as a person. I actually pictured him as being very similar to my younger son, but maybe taller, a little more bulky. Um, and it's so, it's interesting how you have these different perceptions, but it helped me feel just at peace around my own experience and my own path. And
Mhm.
that maybe my path needed to be about learning and about relationships and connections, and less about other things that
Oh, I love that.
maybe I was caught up in.
I love that. That is beautiful. How did that translate into your day-to-day life? I'm just curious.
Oh, you know, um, it's a really good question. I've always tried to be the person who serves, even from a very young age. When I was very young, my mom had some difficult pregnancies, and so I was the oldest of four kids. And so I did the cooking and the cleaning, and I did the laundry. At 7 years old, I was running the laundry machines,
Wow.
and taking care of all that stuff to make sure that my mom didn't have to do it. So move it, jump forward 50 years. Um, I'm still that person. I still try to take care of people. I spend an awful lot of time taking care of my parents right now because they're getting very old and frail.
Mhm.
Um, I try to take care of my kids. There was a point this year that we had 9 people and 5 dogs in our house because the kids all needed a place to live, and they had their pets. And so between my wife and I and our kids and the spouses and the grandkids and the dogs, it was a full house.
It sounds like it.
I have a pretty big house, but that can be a little overwhelming. But that's part of my job is to care and to care for people. And so that's just what I do. I mean, that's what real estate agents do. Is my whole job is to help people find their perfect space, make sure that I understand their needs and the things that they want, and so that they can create a loving, happy environment for themselves.
Mhm.
It kind of falls into all of the areas of your life. So about 3 years ago, I've still been just searching and working and trying to become my best self. And I had this experience where over a week's time, I was kept being introduced to the opportunity to attend a class on shamanism. And this wasn't just a class, it was a 7 month experience where you go once a month and you do weekly check ins. And I was kind of resistant at first. And finally, after about the 10th nudge, um, I just said, okay, God, I get it. This is something you want me to do. And so I did it. And that was earth shaking for me, and just brought me so much peace and brought me so much opportunity to be my best self.
Mhm.
And it's been a wonderful journey.
Well, for those of us, including myself, that don't really know that much about um, the shamanic principles, could you share some of those with us just briefly?
So living in that space of shamanism and the shamanic path, I'll call it, is I'm going to call it just a different way of thinking. um, we've got so many principles in our life that talk to us about being our best, being good and doing the right things. This approaches it from a different aspect or a different direction. Um, the first week I was there, we talked about uh, kind of the overview. And there are 7 archetypes within shamanism that actually correspond to the 7 chakras. So if you don't know what chakras are, they are the nerve centers or the energy centers in your body. And there are 7 from root to crown that run along the center of your body. And each of these archetypes corresponds to a chakra. And we started with serpent energy, which is your root chakra. Serpent energy is all about shedding the things that no longer serve you in your life, that
Mm.
don't serve the highest and best intentions of who you want to be and who you can be. And it's about, leaving those things behind, letting them go. A serpent sheds its skin in order to grow. It in order to do that, it has to rub up against rough rocks, and it has to just really flex and twist and turn. And it's not a comfortable thing. It's not easy, as shedding in our own lives is probably not going to be very easy. um, but doing it with gratitude, looking at those experiences and those things that we're ready to let go of, and saying thank you and expressing gratitude for the opportunity to get where I am in my life, because those things and those experiences are what got me here. They're so resenting them and being angry at them and being frustrated does not serve me well. It actually helps me understand, oh, these are part of my foundation or my framework, for who I am, and I can step away from them and still appreciate the fact that they brought me here.
I love that
Um,
so much because I see that so often when people um, make changes that then they become angry, like you said, angry or resentful about the experiences that they had, and that feeling of anger and resentment actually keeps them not only in a lower space, like mentally and emotionally, but also keeps them tied to that experience in a negative way and unable to see the benefits or the gift that came from that experience. So changing it to gratitude and looking for the good from the experience. And I'm not talking about, I'm not talking about totally ignoring the pain that might come from a challenging experience.
Right.
That's not what I'm talking about. But I'm talking about like working through that pain and getting to that place where you can look back and you can go, I'm thankful for this experience and this experience that made me who I am, because without those experiences, I wouldn't have looked deeper. I wouldn't have challenge myself or whatever the circumstances are. So I love that so much. Thank you for sharing that.
Well, and it can sometimes be hard
Very.
because I can tell you, I'm not happy that I was bullied growing up, but
Mhm.
I am grateful for the learning that I've had from that. And so I think it's making sure that we understand the difference. Because I
Mhm.
think some people are going to think, well, I can't be grateful for all these things. You don't have to be grateful for the experience itself, but expressing gratitude for the learning that has come, I think is the big difference.
Yeah.
And so, and
The
and
path
that's
of growth. Yeah.
the path of growth, the path of understanding who I am because of those things is the difference.
Mhm.
And so that shamanic path is just amazing in the principles that we get. The next one is Jaguar energy, which is all about taking back your power. So often in our lives, we give away our strength and we give away our power to choose. And we believe that we don't have any choices. We don't have the ability to make choices for ourselves because of whatever circumstance we're in, and understanding that we have all the power every day, all the time, but identifying how best to use that and understanding that I've made choices. I choose to go to work so that I can reap the rewards, which is a paycheck. I choose to spend time with family so that I can enjoy that companionship. I get to choose those things. And sometimes we don't always get to choose. I didn't choose to have health problems or whatever that happens to be, but I can choose how I approach those. I can choose how to manage those things in my life. And that's where the power is.
That is beautiful because I often talk about that. People will say, I don't want to go to work or some, like you mentioned the job. And the truth is they do. That's why they go. They're choosing to go for exactly what you just said, for the stability of that paycheck or for the and if they choose differently, they make a different choice. But it's recognizing that a lot of the things even around us that we go, I don't want to do this, I don't want to do this, I don't want to do whatever it is, but they're still doing it. They're actually making a choice to do that thing. And so looking at that thing and saying, I am choosing to do this, that I think about all the, um, as a mom, sometimes we can resent all the work that's involved, for example, and we can say, I, we can be resentful or we can feel like I have to do this or I have to do this. No, you really don't. Like you can let the laundry pile, you can let the dishes pile, but you're choosing to do it because you want the result. You want the clean sink, you want the clean clothes, you want a straight house. So I, I totally endorse everything you're saying.
And so those are just the first two. We have hummingbird energy, which is about doing the impossible. We have eagle energy, which is all about seeing from a higher perspective. And so, and we continue shadow work and having the understanding of unconditional love and, all of those things. So, it progresses and they build on each other and they help us understand who we are and who we can become as we embrace those things and as we look at them, and everyone has their own path. They have their own thought process around what's best for them. And so, it's finding that thing or that group or that space for yourself that allows you to have the comfort and the understanding of who you are, because that's all this is. It's about learning, um, being here and having this earthly experience in our human suit, to figure out how all of this works and just being able to take it with us.
That's wonderful. I hear some people say, um, we're well, and listening to you, obviously you're very connected to other people, you're very service minded. Where does taking care of ourself and that self love and where does that come in? Because I think a lot of times when people hear about self-love and they think, oh, that's selfish, or they think, oh, you're just thinking of yourself. But when we look at it from a grander perspective, it's so much more than that. Can you shed a little light on that?
So I call this um, kind of this understanding the circles of influence. Uh, if you picture a tree that's been cut, and you see all of those circles and those rings that are there, the center of that tree is called the heartwood, and that's the core of the tree. If you picture yourself in that space and that tree ring as you, and that center space, I want you to picture just one big center ring, and I call that our sacred space. And that is the space that we have just for ourselves, for an understanding of who we are, for being able to learn and bring in all of the understanding and to connect to deity or spirit, God, however you want to call that, Mother Earth, Gaia, whomever that is for you. Um, but having that sacred space where you can connect and that's peaceful. And I picture that as a spotless white room that's just for me and for God, to connect and to be in that space. And nobody's ever allowed in that space because that's mine. That's my space to be at peace. Now, the next ring would be how I connect with all of those around me that are my most important people, like my wife. I've been married for 30 years and she's amazing and she completes me and she's a part of who I am. And it's amazing to be able to connect and be in that, have that space for her as well. And then the next space out, I would say, is my children and my parents, people that I choose to be close to, my family that I choose. That that might be my best friends, the people that I just need in my life all the time. Step out again to acquaintances, closer people that I know. Um, and then stepping out even further to community, to nation, to world. You've got all of these rings and how we connect to them. Our most influential space is that sacred space of our own. um, as we fill that and as we make sure that we're cared for. There's the cliche and the phrase that they use on the airplane. What are you supposed to do? Put on your own oxygen mask first, and then help someone else. And we have to do that in order to share and to feed others. We have to be healthy ourselves. And I think that's the key, is understanding who we are, allowing space for ourselves, creating a space that's sacred that nobody else gets to step into. Because when they start stepping into it, or if you step into someone else's space that's sacred to them, it almost feels like you're being invaded. you
Mm,
know it's allowing people that space and never stepping into it, or allowing people to step into yours. It's called respect. It's called boundaries. We are allowed to have healthy boundaries in our life that say, I need this space for me. I need to have this space, and I welcome you to come right up to that space and nudge up against it and be close to me, but you don't get to be in it.
mm.
And I think that people misunderstand. I hope they don't misunderstand, but often they do, that I'm saying you can't have close relationships. And you can. You just have to be able to have that space for yourself to manage and have peace.
Yeah. Well, and that's beautiful imagery, because if we think about a tree that, because we know of trees that are hollow and they're dead. They're
Mm-hmm.
they're not sturdy, they're not alive. So it's beautiful imagery. It's when we feed that core of who we are, just like putting on the oxygen mask first. When we feed that core of who we are, we bring life to the full tree. We bring life to the full community of our existence, to our family, to our friends, to our community outside of that, because there's life within us, because
Right.
we're feeding that center of who we are. Yeah, I love that
And
imagery.
going with that tree analogy still, the roots reach out and bring in nutrients. The leaves and the branches do the same thing. They bring in the light and the nutrients, which is what we get from other people
Mhm.
and that we get from those relationships and those connections that we have. And so it's really nice to be able to picture, that I have those roots that kind of trail out and reach out and connect with other people. There are whole forests that are so connected around the world that they're all one tree system or one tree that, if one got infected, it could affect the whole thing. And
Mm,
so understanding that connection is really important and making sure that we enjoy that space rather than dread it. I know we've got a culture right now where you know, people don't call anymore. They don't have in-person conversations anymore. We don't work on those things. It's easier to text. It's
mhm,
easier to just, send a quick note rather than make the phone call. Growing up, we didn't have cell phones. We didn't have the ability to text. We didn't have email. There was none of that. We had a phone on the wall, and if you wanted privacy, you stretched the cord around the corner and you sat in the closet and closed the door so you hoped that nobody could hear you. But your brother was sitting on the outside of the door with the cup and listening,
and
right?
making fun of your conversation, likely.
Exactly. And so, the world has shifted dramatically, and we've lost a lot of connection. And it's so amazing what happens when you can sit with someone and have a conversation and just talk about the things that are going on in your life and the struggles and the wins and all of the things because suddenly they don't feel so heavy
Mm,
or they feel bigger. The wins feel even better and more exciting because you can share them with someone,
mm,
and we miss out a lot on that.
yeah. Yeah, such a good reminder. Such a good reminder. Thank you for sharing that. I was like I said, I wasn't very familiar with what you call the shamanic path, and that's just a beautiful introduction to it. So thank you so much for sharing that with us.
It can be pretty amazing. One of the things to keep in mind is that a lot of people think that is plant medicines. So I just want to say everything I do is substance free. I'm not out there just looking for an opportunity to use a plant medicine. I think it's important that people use things wisely. If that's their path, that's okay. They just need to do it in the right way and they need to do it under proper supervision and make sure that they're doing things in a way that they're safe. And
Mhm.
so for me, that has this, Spirit said it's really important that you be able to connect to Spirit on your own without, using something that's going to help push that along. Maybe at some point that'll be something that I need to try and need to do. But right now, it's been really great to just have that opportunity to be connected to God and to Spirit without that.
Yeah, yeah. I want to go back to something you said earlier because I have had the same experience. My kids died when they were young, and I've had the same experience that I think it surprises people sometimes when I say when I connect with them, they feel very mature.
Mhm.
They're mature spirit and far ahead of where I am and in so many ways. And I think that that concept sometimes is a little challenging for people, but I also feel like when we I, well, and this is the interesting thing that I've noticed with near death experiences is that the experiences are similar, but they're unique and they're individual for the individual. So for me, I wonder, when I get to the other side, which hopefully isn't anytime soon, um, I feel like I know that I'm going to connect with my son and my daughter and even my brother and many others who I've lost in my life. But my children who were kids when they died, I'm not sure exactly how they'll show up, but my sense is because I already connect to them as that mature spirit. And as I say this, I'm just seeing this visual of my daughter as a full grown woman. She's just beautiful, and filled with so much light. My sense is that I will connect with them as that mature spirit even after I leave here. But I do feel like for those who it would be important for them to go to the other side and their child is still a child, that they would have that experience, and that would um, be an introduction to them. I don't know. I was just thinking about that out loud, and I was just wondering what, like you mentioned, when you see your son as a mature spirit, is that is Bryce someone that you feel you can connect to, or how does that look for you?
So it's really interesting being in that space of shamanism. Um, it's all about being the bridge. A shaman is someone who is the bridge between the physical here and the spiritual. And
Mm,
so being able to connect the two. And so I never really thought about, the connection and being connected to Bryce and being able to have, maybe a spiritual interaction, with me in my human suit and him in his spiritual suit, um, until I stepped into that space. Um, and so when I started looking at that and started, reaching out and try working on that connection better, I've not had actual conversations, but I can feel him near.
mhm,
And he feels like an adult to me. He's never felt like an infant. After he passed, my wife and I had a couple of experiences of feeling him close and feeling him, you know, in that infant form. And I think that's because that's what we needed at the time, like you mentioned.
mhm.
But in the years since, I've always pictured him as an adult. I've never pictured him as a child. And so um, I think you're right. I think maybe it is based on our need and how we feel like we need to connect. Um, and so maybe they share and connect with us based on our need and our ability to connect, is maybe part of that. Um, my other experiences in connecting with the other side have been similar, where those spirits are adult, they're mature, they're progressing, they're learning, they're understanding, they are who they are in their most perfect form, as spirits, as beings of light. And so that's kind of where I've my experience has led me.
Yeah. How has how has feeling him near, or your spiritual path, how has that helped you in your own healing? Because that's a super challenging grief experience to lose your son. Um, how has your spiritual path helped you heal from that experience?
You know, I think it's really interesting that we use the word heal. Um, it's for me personally, like I needed to heal. I felt like I just needed to connect.
Mm,
Um, it hurts sometimes still. It's still incredibly painful on certain days. I'm for the most part, I'm good every day, but there are still those times where I just get triggered and I feel like, wow, I, you know, this is such an awful thing, and it's not even about Bryce not being here. It's about the expectations that were lost.
right.
Um, and so in having a more spiritual focus and being able to feel like I can be close to him and I can have him close by and I can feel him is so nice. It's actually more comforting than with my other kids because I have absolutely no idea what they're doing. They're one lives, about 45 minutes away. The other one lives upstairs here in my house with me, you know. And so you just wonder. I was driving home yesterday And there was a car accident, and the car was not the same car as my daughter's, but it's similar. It, and so I'm like, oh, do I need to call home? Do I need to do all these things? So I'm going to call that a trigger because all of a
Mhm.
sudden I had all of these worries about things. And knowing where Bryce is and knowing what's going on, I don't have to stress about that one.
Right.
It's the ones that are here in their human suits that I worry about, and the
Yeah.
grandkids and all the things that they're dealing with. So I'm almost more at peace with Bryce and being able to, manage those things that I am with the other kids.
That makes so much sense to me. Even right after the accident when Carrie and David died, I remember telling a friend like the next day, I said, they're forever safe. Now, that did not mean that I was okay in that moment. I was in excruciating pain for months, but I was grateful for that sense that they were okay. And I get that from you too, that you have just such a clarity of his yeah, that he is good and doing good things, and no doubt he's with you and your kids and your family and doing all the things that he can to lead and guide and direct and nudge you in ways that maybe are completely unseen and unrecognizable. Is there anything else you'd like to share before we end our conversation?
I'm still just thinking about that experience with Bryce, and I look at just today, you and I as friends, we've known each other for a couple of years, and looking back at that experience of losing Bryce, are the two are very connected. And the reason they're connected is it changed the trajectory of my life to lose Bryce and turned me to a different path. And that path included the people that I met and the experiences that I've had. Our mutual friend is Richard Paul Evans, who I met soon after Bryce died, and we maintained a connection. If Bryce hadn't passed, I wouldn't have probably met Richard. I wouldn't have met Julie. I wouldn't have met the hundreds of friends that I have along that trajectory. And so, it's learning to look at that whole experience and saying, what can I learn from this?
Yeah.
How can I use this to improve my life? I'm working on a book called Context Lenses. And the book is all about our perceptions. It's all about our ability to see our lives for what they are and take in the experience and use it in a positive way and clear away all of the other things that clutter up our lenses and that we look through, our labels and all of the things that um, we've taken on and that we carry around on our shoulders, maybe is the picture that most people have. I think that we have them on our lenses and we try to look through this space, but it's cluttered. And so trying to remove those things and make them part of the framework or part of our foundation of who we are um, creates a much easier path. It's much easier to see where you're going when your glasses are clean or when your lenses are clear. And so stepping outside of the stories, stepping outside of all of those things and being able to use them in a positive way. So when I say, what can I learn from Bryce's death? What's the experience how can I use that experience to make my life better? I've done it. I'm not saying that it's an easy thing. I'm not saying that it's something that everyone can do right this second,
Mm-mm.
but having the understanding that each of these experiences, maybe that we didn't choose, we have that power, that jaguar energy, as I talked about, to choose how we look at our lives and how we look at our experiences and how we can use them.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. One more question, and then I'm going to ask you to share, how people can get in touch with you. But I'm wondering what spiritual practices you may have that maybe you do on a daily or weekly basis that help you stay connected spiritually.
So, one of the biggest things is quiet time. You can call it meditation, you can call it prayer, whatever that looks like for you. That time for me to connect with God and to connect with spirit um, is huge for me. Taking that that time to allow the peace of life to just be in my space, and I will often do breath work with that. I'll do what I call just a 3 by 3, where I'll breathe in for 3 counts, I'll hold it for 3 counts, and I'll breathe out for three, and I'll do that 3 times. And because I'm counting, because I'm working on the focus of hitting the numbers right and holding my breath and exhaling and all of those things, I'm so focused on that that everything else goes away. Everything else just stops, and I'm able to be in a peaceful, quiet moment. And you can do 3 of those. You could do 6 of them. You could do 9. You could do 32,000. Whatever works for you in that space, and just being focused on one thing, and the quiet, and connecting to the spirituality, the opportunity to have calm. I study. I look for opportunities to learn more and to understand more about life and more about connection and more about people, because people are my favorite thing. They're fascinating, they're wonderful, they're just kind, they're loving, you know, even the grumpy ones, are it just they're just it's just more of a challenge, right? It's about learning to love, and loving myself first. And I think that's probably been the biggest piece of my transformation and my path and my journey, is learning that I'm okay to love. I'm okay to be who I am and to be myself. I don't have to be what everyone else wants me to be. I'm okay to be myself, because that's me being authentic and being connected to creator.
I love that. Thank you so much. Okay, I know there's people that are going to want to connect with you, Alan. Tell them where they can connect with you.
You can connect with me a few different ways. My website is thesoulpath.com. Now, the spelling's a little weird. It's the SOLE path. So, soul, like the sole of your shoe. Where is your soul taking you? Where will your souls take you today? Where have your souls taken you in the past? It's all about understanding your path. And so I have to explain that, because people are like, well, why would you do it that way? That's not spelled right. You know, kind of one of those funny things. The other place you can find me is my email is theroguesoul@gmail.com. Uh, because I feel like I'm a little off the path. I'm off, that everyone else is taking.
Off the
Um,
norm.
Off the norm. So I'm a little bit of a rogue. And you can find me on Instagram at Crazy Shoe Guy, because I love shoes. I once owned a shoe store, and it just created this love of shoes and of fashion, and it's fun for me. So most people know me as the shoe guy, or as the crazy shoe guy, and they're always looking for what shoes I'm wearing. So there will be some fun shoes and some stories to go with them.
Awesome. I love that. Thank you so much, Alan. Thank you for coming on the show today and sharing your story.
My pleasure. Thanks for inviting me.